Welcome to this meeting of the Victoria chapter of the Australian Academy of Liturgy. It gives me great joy to welcome our speaker today, who is Peter Weeks. Peter is a long-standing member of this chapter, having joined in the year 2000. Peter is a minister of the Word in the Uniting Church in Australia. Following ordination in 1984, he has served in parishes in Tasmania and Victoria and retired at the height of the COVID lockdowns in Melbourne in 2020. Today's presentation reflects Peter's experience of the evolving understanding of marriage in the Uniting Church. His title maps the development of understanding of marriage as a hierarchical relationship between men and women to the adoption of gender-neutral language in the 2018 alternative marriage rite. From equality in marriage to marriage equality helps to locate the most recent changes to the marriage rite in this longer story. And I think this is an important thing to note, especially in light of changes in the last 5 years. Peter is uniquely placed to speak about the development of marriage rights in light of changes to the Marriage Act in 2017. Peter was married for 31 years, and he has been in a partnership with Daniel since 2007. And through this relationship, they have engaged with the process of recognising same-sex unions in Australia. In 2010, they were blessed at a sacred union ceremony and registered in Victoria as a domestic partnership. In October 2019, Peter and Daniel were married according to the rites of the Uniting Church. Prior to his marriage, Peter had presided at 3 same-sex weddings in the previous year. And it's a wonderful mark of how social change occurs that Peter now lives on Letta Merina country, known to those of us of more recent arrival in Australia as Tasmania, and that he enjoys this retirement with his husband, Daniel. So, Peter, I will hand over to you now.
So firstly, I wish to acknowledge that I live on the banks of Kanamaluka, the Tamar River, on the land of the Tierra Notapana people, the North Midlands tribe of Lutruwita, Tasmania. As Kieran mentioned, this paper is titled From Equality in Marriage to Marriage Equality. In this presentation, I'll outline the process of change that has taken place within the Uniting Church and touch on some of its theological and liturgical implications. I'll seek to address broader questions about how the Uniting Church's theological understanding of marriage, as expressed in liturgy, has evolved, charting the emergence of an understanding of marriage equality, that is, equality in marriage, a non-hierarchical, non-patriarchal understanding of marriage. I've often reminded the people at weddings I conduct that marriage is an institution that has changed significantly over time. For most of its history, marriage has been a legal contract between 2 men transferring property, the bride, from one to another. Even up to the present day, vestiges of this understanding of marriage has continued to play a part in marriage ceremonies, although most people don't realise it, whether both Christian and civil. From its beginning, the Uniting Church removed these last symbolic links to a totally outmoded way of viewing marriage. In the Uniting Church marriage ceremony, the bride is not given away by anyone, and the groom is not invited to kiss the bride, that is, seal the claim to his new possession. Instead, family members of both parties are invited to give their blessing, and the couple are invited to greet each other or seal their covenant with a kiss. The Uniting Church wedding ceremony in the 3 versions authorised since union clearly portrays an understanding of equality in marriage. Earlier forms of Christian marriage services also listed procreation as one of the principal purposes of marriage. This is not the case in the Uniting Church's understanding of marriage as indicated in its marriage services. Some brief background. Until 1997, the Uniting Church did not have a declared statement of belief regarding marriage, except what was found in the marriage rites themselves. At Union in 1977, the marriage rites of the three uniting churches were accepted as rites according to the Uniting Church in Australia. In the early 1980s, a number of service booklets were published as official liturgies of the Church: Holy Communion, Baptism and Confirmation, Marriage, and Funeral. In 1988, our first official book of services and liturgical resources, Uniting in Worship, was published. It contained revised versions of all the official rites plus additional resources. In 2005, Uniting in Worship 2 was released with further revisions and resources. So what has been the Uniting Church's stated understanding of marriage? I did share these with you, so you've got them in writing. The 2005 rite begins with these words: marriage is a gift of God and a means of grace. In the lifelong union of marriage, we can know the joy of God, in whose image we are made, male and female. Marriage is founded in God's loving nature, and in the covenant of love made with us in Christ, husband and wife, in giving themselves to each other in love, reflect the love of Christ for his church. In Christian marriage, wife and husband are called to live together faithfully and to love each other with respect, tenderness, and delight. The companionship and comfort of marriage enables the full expression of physical love between husband and wife. They share the life of a home and may be entrusted with the gift and care of children. They help to shape a society in which human dignity and happiness may flourish and abound. Marriage is a way of life that all people should honour. It is not to be entered into lightly or selfishly, but responsibly and in the love of God. This declaration gives more emphasis on husband and wife than the 1988 version, reflecting the 1997 Assembly Statement of Belief on Marriage, which I'll refer to later. But it's clear, as in previous rites, that there's no hierarchy within marriage. Husband and wife are equal partners. Now, the 2018 alternative rite states, marriage is a gift of God and a means of grace. In the lifelong union of marriage, we can know the joy of God in whose image we are made. Marriage is founded in God's loving nature, and in the covenant of love made with us in Christ, two people, in giving themselves to each other in love, reflect the love of Christ for his church. In Christian marriage, couples are called to live together faithfully and to love each other with respect, tenderness, and delight. The companionship and comfort of marriage enables the full expression of physical love. They share the life of a home and may be entrusted with the gift and care of children. They help to shape a society in which human dignity and happiness may flourish and abound. Marriage is a way of life that all people should honour. It is not to be entered into lightly or selfishly, but responsibly and in the love of God. A minimal linguistic change with maximal practical and theological impact. So, how did we get to this point? In 1997, the National Assembly, which has responsibility for determining matters of doctrine and liturgy, issued a statement on marriage. Marriage for Christians is the freely given consent and commitment in public before God of a man and a woman to live together for life. It is intended to be the faithful lifelong union of a man and of a woman and a man expressed in every part of their life together. In marriage, the man and the woman seek to encourage and enrich each other through love and companionship. In the marriage service, the woman and the man make a public covenant with each other and with God in the company of family and friends. The couple affirm their trust in each other and in God. The church affirms the sanctity of marriage and nurtures those who pledge themselves to each other in marriage, and calls upon all people to support, uphold, and nurture those who pledge themselves to each other in marriage. Where sexual union takes place, the partners seek to express mutual delight, pleasure, and tenderness, thus strengthening the union of their lives together. In marriage, children may be born and are to be brought up in love and security, thus providing a firm foundation for society. In 2012, the Assembly was asked to set up a process of consultation across the church to review the church's understanding of marriage, specifically including the question of whether or not people in same-gender relationships could be included in a definition of marriage. I need to note here that in all of the material relating to this topic through Assembly, the term same-gender relationships was used rather than same-sex relationships, primarily because it was a more useful expression when translating into the various languages that make up the Uniting Church. But I think the same gender actually works better anyway. Anyway, continuing on. There was an interim report presented to the 2015 Assembly, at which the task group was charged with doing further work, with the final report and recommendations to come to the 2018 Assembly. That report was presented on the first day of the Assembly, with time given on every day of the week-long meeting for discussion, reflection, debate in plenary sessions and in working groups. At the end of the week, a decision was reached in a secret ballot by a margin that was well clear of the 2/3 majority that had been set by the Assembly itself. The Assembly resolved, A, to acknowledge, 1, that within the Uniting Church there is a diversity of religious beliefs and ethical understandings, developed through continuing faithful discernment and held with integrity on matters relating to sexuality and marriage. And 2, that marriage is a gift God has given to humankind for the well-being of the whole human family. B, to determine that the Church is able to accept this diversity within its life and make the decisions necessary to enable its ministry and members to act with integrity in accordance with their beliefs. C, to vary its policy on marriage by recognising 2 statements of belief. The first being the 1997 statement that I read earlier, and then a second statement using the same words but replacing man and woman with 2 people. During the process, it was pointed out that the very existence of the Uniting Church depended on the holding of 2 very different doctrines side by side, namely Calvinist and Wesleyan doctrines of grace. Multicultural, Indigenous and ecumenical concerns were all raised as part of the debate at Assembly. Time doesn't permit a full exploration of those today, but it's of significance that when members of the Assembly had opportunities to share their thoughts in plenary sessions, there were Indigenous, Korean, Tongan, Samoan and Indian voices supporting the change. It has frequently been pointed out that part of the Uniting Church's commitment to ecumenism is a willingness to step out of what might be called an ecumenical consensus on a variety of matters where it believes the Spirit of God to be calling us. For example, the ordination of women and corporate rather than personal episcopacy. The resolution also authorised the creation of a second rite, identical in all things with the existing rite, in all other things with the existing rite, for use by celebrants who wish to operate under the two-people definition. To be clear, there is not one rite for straight couples and another rite for same-gender couples. Those who cannot in good conscience use the two-people version will continue to use the previous version, as they will only be conducting man and woman weddings. Others will use the two-people version, regardless of the gender of the people being married. Ministers and other church-authorised celebrants have the freedom to operate with integrity under whichever statement of belief holds true for them. Church councils, likewise, have the freedom to decide whether weddings conducted on their premises are man, woman, or two people, but they cannot prevent their minister from acting under either rubric. This alternative rite was first able to be used after the end of September 2018. It's worth noting that the decision was not a direct response to the 2017 change in federal law, but coincided with it. Towards the end of 2018, a number of presbyteries, regional councils, our corporate bishop, were seeking to have the matter recommitted for consideration. Under our constitution, if the Assembly deems, by a two-thirds majority, a matter to be of vital importance to the life of the Church, it may refer the decision to synods and or presbyteries and or congregations for concurrence. The Assembly consciously decided not to take this course. But there's also a clause which says, if within 6 months of a decision of the Assembly or its standing committee, or at least half the presbyteries within the bounds of each of at least half the synods, or at least half the synods, notify the president that they have determined that in their opinion, a decision includes a matter vital to the life of the Church, and there was inadequate consultation prior to the decision, the president shall notify the Church that the decision is suspended until the Assembly has undertaken further consultation. Section 39(1) of the Constitution. While it was close, by mid-January 2019, the 6-month deadline, the number of objecting presbyteries was not enough to have the matter recommitted. So much for the process. What about the substance? Going back to the Declaration of Purpose from the 2005 Rite, it can be seen that this statement makes as much sense for a same-gender union as it does for an opposite-gender union. Let me highlight some aspects. Marriage is a gift of God and a means of grace. In the lifelong union of marriage, we can know the joy of God in whose image we are made. The statement adds, parenthetically, male and female. I've always taken that to refer to the equality of male and female as bearers of the image of God, a corrective to previous unequal patriarchal views both of God and humanity. Of course, it's also intended to give the idea of community. Male and female together bear the image of God, not just individually. But does this mean that in marriage it can only be male and female together, or that marriage has to be defined only as between a man and a woman? I fully accept the argument that true community between people, regardless of gender, is where the image of God resides. But within that community, there are many and varied sub-communities. So if we just simply say that in the lifelong union of marriage, we can know the joy of God in whose image we are made, full stop, then that what follows applies equally to same gender and opposite gender couples. The terms husband and wife that are used throughout to refer to the then existing arrangements and assumptions can easily be removed without changing any of the meaning of the statement. Thus, marriage is founded in God's loving nature and in the covenant of love made with us in Christ. Two people, in giving themselves to each other in love, reflect the love of Christ for his church. In Christian marriage, couples are called to live together faithfully and to love each other with respect, tenderness, and delight. Excuse me. The companionship and comfort of marriage enables the full expression of physical love. The next paragraph raised a smile at a wedding I conducted a few years ago where the bride was 75 and the groom 82. They share the life of a home and may be entrusted with the gift and care of children. I needed to add an explanation that this was part of a general understanding of marriage, not an announcement about this particular marriage. This relates to one of the crucial arguments that was made about marriage, or was being made about marriage, both in civil and religious sphere. Marriage is for procreation, the bearing of children. But we know that there are many children born without marriage being involved, and there are many marriages that do not produce children. Note that the Uniting Church Rite does not say, and has never said, that marriage is for the bearing of children, nor does it require children. It says that those who marry, because of the commitment that it involves in sharing a life and a home, may be entrusted with the gift and care of children. In other words, marriage provides a secure environment in which children can be raised, however they may be produced. Couples may receive the gift of children by birth or by adoption. Children may come as a package deal with one of the partners, or there may be no children. At this point, the 2005 and 2018 Rite departs slightly from the statement of belief, which includes the line, "In marriage, children may be born and brought up." As was pointed out at the time of the political debate about marriage, the civil law made no reference to children in its definition of marriage. Catholic Church law, I understand, and I'm open to correction on this from colleagues, requires openness to bearing children as part of its definition of sacramental marriage. But would they refuse to marry a 75 and 82-year-old couple? The Uniting Church and its predecessors have never had this requirement. Most of us would affirm that marriage is not just about the couple, but includes a very significant social and communal dimension. Thus, a valid marriage, legally and ecclesiastically, requires at the very least a celebrant and two witnesses. By including those of us who are in same-gender relationships within the definition of marriage, the Church has taken a further step to help shape a society in which human dignity and happiness may flourish and abound. And here endeth the paper.
Thank you, Peter. And that was a really engaging discussion of both the process of change and some of its implications. We have some time for discussion now. With the nature of the online environment, we find that this phase of the meeting often works with moderation. And of course, we try to make sure that people have an opportunity to speak. If you do want to speak, please use the chat function either to all or to me, and I will call on you to speak, or you can use the raise hand function and I'll call on you to speak. When I do ask you to speak, please make sure you are unmuted before you launch on your question or comment. And to make sure that everyone has the best opportunity to offer reflections or questions, I do request that you keep these focused and preferably brief, not least because it makes it easier to follow in this format. So do we have anyone available? Is there anybody who would like to offer a question or a reflection or a remark? I see Chris McElhenney has his hand up and then Colleen has her hand up. So Chris first.
Thanks, Kieran. Thank you, Peter. Just back to the response of Indigenous, Asian and Pacific Islanders, I'd be a bit more interested as to what extent that was favourable or not, if you can fill us in there.
Yeah, one of the things we learned was that there is not universal agreement. There had been an assumption based on fairly solid evidence, I think, from before, that many of the migrant ethnic congregations were not favourable on a number of levels. I know of a Korean congregation who refused to have the chairperson of presbytery conduct the induction of their new minister because she was a lesbian in a same-gender relationship. So there is a fairly strong conservative element across many of the different cultural groups within the church. In the past, the Indigenous section of the church, the Uniting Aboriginal and Islander Christian Congress, had made it quite clear that they would not discuss the issue or a number of issues relating to sexuality over the years. And when those topics came up as assembly, they would tend to indicate that they could not discuss it and would leave the meeting for the discussion to happen without them. In 2018, in January, at the Congress's national conference, they made a very significant decision to basically what we'd say in politics, allow a conscience vote. They said that they would not have a block understanding or act as a block, that individuals were free to speak on their own behalf but not on behalf of the Congress. So that really opened up some possibilities. So when I mentioned that a number of different groups, they were individuals who spoke at the assembly from various ethnic backgrounds, and they certainly didn't represent everybody from their communities, but it was significant that there was a significant number who did speak. And who spoke in favour of change.
Colleen.
Muted.
Is that better?
That's better.
Excellent. Thank you for an interesting paper, and thank you for those two prefaces that you provided for us. I'm really intrigued that we still struggle with this issue around the purposes of marriage. It was a really big controversy at the time of the Reformation, as I'm sure you're aware. And the English reformers and the continental reformers had different views about the primary purpose of marriage. And that's still, I think, still an issue. I think more settled in the community than perhaps amongst some Christians. And it's so helps this seniors moment. Of course, what people often don't understand is that the statement at the beginning of the marriage service is a statement of the, as you said, of the general teaching of the church on issue of these relationships, and not necessarily specifically for that couple. And as you said, certainly people who are past childbearing are entitled to be married in the church. That's certainly not a prohibition in the Anglican Church. I doubt that Roman Catholics would not conduct such a marriage either, because marriage is also linked, particularly for us and more so for them, to baptism. The primary requirement for us is that one of the parties be baptized. In the Roman Church, it would be the same. But I'm just interested that we're still debating what is marriage really about, and perhaps that's something that every generation, in a sense, comes to afresh, or the church needs to grapple with afresh in every time, and because it is such a malleable institution.
Yeah, that's right. We've been given the impression that marriage has existed in its whatever its current form might be, since time began, when clearly it hasn't.
No,
it has changed.
No evidence of a marriage service before the 9th century. And marriage involved property, as you said at the beginning, a woman being part of that. And it's interesting, the Orthodox marriage service makes a reference to Rebecca and Isaac, who of course are the only monogamous couple in the Old Testament. Which people forget as well. Yeah.
Sophie Morley has just dropped in some information that helps to clarify the position in the Catholic Church. And I'll just make sure we have this read out so that it's not lost on the video. And Sophie says, the following question may be omitted if circumstances suggest this. For example, if the couple is advanced in years. Are you prepared to accept children lovingly from God and bring them up according to the law of Christ and his church? So there is clearly some pastoral consideration in the Catholic rite for couples who are not in a position where childbearing is likely to occur. But Peter, of course, you drew to our attention that children can come into a marriage by a variety of means.
That's right. Yeah.
And perhaps one that we neglect or forget, particularly when older people marry, is that children may in fact be themselves adults, and the infants to which we're referring are in fact grandchildren.
Yeah. Yep.
And
thanks for that, Sophie. That information, and for reading it out too, Kieran. That's helpful.
Alison Wish also put a question in the chat.
Yes.
Alison, if you would like to join us on sound, would you like to put what you've written in the chat in verbal?
Yep. Peter, thank you. That was a really nice refresher of the journey that I've sort of been part of in bits and pieces over the years. So must have taken you a bit of digging. Anyway, where did I put my question? Oh, yes. As I said, as one of the more experienced colleagues when it comes to marriage under the two persons definition, in the practical enacting of the liturgy, how have you found it works, in inverted commas, and responds to what couples are looking for? Because, in preparing couples, in my limited experience, you always have to do a bit of educating along the way in terms of what the service is about and how it works, because they often have very clear ideas about what they're wanting.
Yes, yes. Usually influenced either by family tradition or movies and television.
Yeah.
In the three weddings that I did under this, the three same gender weddings anyway that I did under this, there were no questions raised about the content of that. It was accepted that this is the church's wedding service, and so it's accepted, which has been pretty much the case with every wedding I've done in nearly 36 years. The only wedding where we really went through the statement of the declaration of purpose in fine detail was a wedding I did back in Hobart. That was Uniting in Worship 1 at that stage, which is slightly different wording, but the couple were atheists. The groom was a lecturer in politics or social something or other at the university, came from South America, from a fundamentalist Baptist background, which may explain some of his atheism, an avowed Marxist. But they found civil celebrants didn't seem to offer them anything worthwhile. They contacted several who simply said, "Oh, well, you can look online and find details, find things you want in it, and then come back to us with what you've put together, and we'll do it for you and collect the money." And they somehow got put on to me, referred to me, and they liked the fact that our service has a fair amount of flexibility in it. But when we sat down and started going through it, he was resisting very strongly the whole language of the Declaration of Purpose, because for him, even though I couldn't see it anywhere in there, he was hearing stuff that linked back to his fire and brimstone language from his Peruvian Baptist background. I found it very difficult to see where he might see that, but then I wasn't coming from that background. But we talked through it, and this of all the weddings I've done, this is the one that's had the most thorough going into at every point of the thing. I said to him, look, if I were writing a declaration of purpose, an understanding of marriage, it might be worded slightly different, but this is the church's understanding of marriage. And we say this at every wedding. Anyway, he thought about it for a while and he said, well, I think I can accept that, but would it be possible to add a paragraph that states what we understand we are doing? I said, absolutely, you write me the paragraph and I can read that as a statement of your understanding of what you're doing. And so he did, and it was a very nice little paragraph that he wrote, which ended with the line, and let 1,000 flowers bloom, which I thought was rather nice, especially as we're having the wedding in their garden. After the wedding, somebody approached me and said, how did you cope quoting Chairman Mao in the wedding service? I said, I wasn't aware that I was. And apparently that line comes from Chairman Mao. So yeah, we did some negotiation there that worked out well for everybody. And I had a lot of comments afterwards from people saying that both they felt that both the church's understanding and the couple's understanding of marriage were fitted together in a way that had integrity for both, which I was very pleased had happened. It was probably one of the most significant weddings I've done.
Caro or any of the other colleagues of Uniting Church, I'm asking. My reason for asking is because of the panel on worship, just to garner any experience that you might have had. Because I've been with such elderly congregations, even when I've suggested a couple of the couples might like to be married, they've run a mile and not taken me up on the offer. So I've actually done a wedding now for over 5 years. So,
oh goodness,
I'm very short on experience. But anyway, if nobody else has been down,
no, I have to say I'm with you on that one, Alison. My placements have been more funeral destinations than wedding destinations.
Yeah, more critique of that.
I've been involved in 2 same gender marriages here in Echuca. The first one, the Uniting Church hadn't approved the liturgy yet, so I worked with a marriage celebrant who is part of our congregation, and the couple, the 2 women they were happy to go along pretty much with the Uniting Church order of liturgy, and so that was very pleasing. They were, I've done 2 now. Yeah, so they were both Catholic girls actually, and so they both had a faith in God and wanted to be married in the church. And then I've conducted another marriage of 2 women, and that was once the alternative marriage liturgy was approved. So I did that by myself, and that was actually down in the aquatic reserve. That was during COVID, so it was just myself, 2 witnesses, and a photographer at a distance.
Yeah. Well, the last wedding I conducted, the third of the 3 same gender weddings I did was that size, but not because of COVID. It was 2019. It was actually the week before our own wedding. It was reverted to the ancient practice, or the early practice in many parts of rural Australia, particularly, of the wedding took place in the manse. It was just the couple and their 2 witnesses, and Dan and myself. There were a variety of reasons. We were going to have it in the church, but there were a variety of reasons on their side why they wanted to have it in an even more private setting, but still with the required number of people present. In fact, only one of the 3 weddings that I've done under this was in a church, and that was in a regional large church at Hamilton in Western Victoria.
I see Chris McElhenney has his hand raised again. So, Chris.
Well, actually, it's just for Darcy. He's trying to get your attention, but he's just waving. So.
Oh, okay. Darcy.
Thank you. I thought I must be making the wrong gesture somehow. Two questions, Peter. The first is, would you agree that the change in the Uniting Church's doctrinal stance, which took only a decade, was really quite rapid when you consider the very important and basic questions that are involved? My opinion is that yes, it was done well, but also done rapidly. My second question is, do you know if anybody has researched the issue of the numbers of Uniting Church clergy who have conducted same-gender marriages, or slightly differently, those who would be willing to do so, whether they have done so or not?
I think I can answer the second one fairly easily. As far as I know, no, that research hasn't been done. It would be good to know.
Yeah.
It would also be good to know which churches are open to the possibility.
Yes.
Because we don't actually, well, some of us do, but not everybody puts a sign up on their front notice board to say we have a more open policy on marriage. My parish did have, my last placement did have a note on the main notice board that marriages were conducted regardless of the gender of the participants. The first question was
about the rapidity of the change made by the church.
Yes, I suppose, yeah, looking back on it now, it does seem like it was a fairly rapid change. At the time, it didn't really feel all that rapid for those of us for whom it had some added significance. But I think it built on decades of uniting church reflection on the place of homosexual people within the life of the church, which has been part of our church since the mid-1980s, when the question was first raised, and was clearly answered back then that our sexuality had no bearing in itself on our status as baptized members of the church or of leadership. I think Avril Hannah-Jones's research, doctoral research, showed that every 7 years we had to go back and reinvent the whole question again, because we'd forgotten the history. And so it came up in different forms about every 7 years or so. But to the point of affirming that presbyteries have the right to ordain people without, I forget what the term was, but on a case-by-case basis. There's no blanket rule across the board. And so I think having had all of that work done over 35 years perhaps helps the move towards getting this next step. There are those of us who would say the decision we came up with was not really ideal, to have the two distinct and quite opposing views on marriage as held, but it was recognised that we needed to somehow hold the diversity together that is there in the uniting church, to recognise it and to allow it to sit with some sort of integrity.
Yeah. Well, I agree with you. I think the church did the only thing that was realistic. I wasn't part of the assembly discussion at that last stage, but it seems to me that when you have such a clear division of opinion, but you want to say what is the practical import of the church's position, the only realistic thing to do was to say, well, we do have two different theologies of marriage, and here they are.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you. Colleen has just noted in the chat that only 22% of marriages are now conducted by religious celebrants. Yeah. And I see Michelle Lees has a raised hand. Is that...
Yes, that's right. I wanted to just comment on the fact that we didn't need to advertise that we would conduct same-gender marriages, because it went round town like wildfire once we had made that decision. And for one of the marriages, one of the workers at a local supermarket told the mother of a bride-to-be that they should try the Uniting Church for their marriage. So That's
the
the way
beauties
it
of
happens.
small of the country grapevine. It's interesting, talking about the number of marriages percentage by religious celebrants. We had the interesting experience in the year that we were married. Earlier in the year, we attended a wedding in a uniting church that was actually a civil ceremony conducted by a celebrant who happens to be a member of the uniting church. And the couple are members of the uniting church, but it was clearly a civil ceremony held in the church with the minister participating, but not leading. Whereas my own wedding was a uniting church rite, but in a garden, not in a church building.
It's perhaps noteworthy to mention, of course, that in the Anglican Church there has been a development towards a blessing of a same-sex couple after a civil marriage, which was subject to approval, well, subject to challenge through our appellate tribunal, and was last year approved. To my knowledge, it is only able to be used in one diocese, and there has only been used with one couple. However, there may be others who have better information on that than I do. And of course, it happens to be the diocese to which I have just moved, which is Wangaratta.
So Sophie had her hand up as well, Kieran.
Did she now? Sophie,
yep.
If you have your hand up, please go.
Just referring back to Peter, I can apologise. I came a bit late to your paper because I had an appointment with my parish priest, which ended up a lot longer than I expected. But it was really good to hear what I did hear. Just referring back to that marriage ceremony that you said was conducted by a civil celebrant in the church, I'm really curious as to perhaps the reasons that might be that they actually didn't want the minister to be the officiating person.
Yeah, I think there are a variety of reasons. One is that the celebrant was a very close friend of the couple. Both the couple and the celebrant had been leading members of our uniting network, our national GLBTI network, and I think with the couple, where the couple sort of sit perhaps on the edge of the life of the church a bit. So the full church rite perhaps didn't suit them. Actually, I just realised we attended another one in Adelaide in April this year. That one was conducted by Uniting Church ministers, a married couple, but it was not the actual rite. We do have a thing in the Uniting Church called what is it, Caro? Ordered liberty for our liturgy. I'm not absolutely sure whether the format of this service quite comes under ordered liberty, but we do have a lot of flexibility in a lot of our liturgical gatherings and practices, and so that was conducted by ministers, but not using the rite.
Thank you. That's very interesting, and I know a little bit about the flexibility of the Uniting Church services because my husband is the parish secretary of his Uniting Church, and I'm a member in the association, so I'm blessed with two congregations.
Lucky you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Does anybody else have a question or a comment or a reflection? Alison, I see you have your hand raised.
Just following up that earlier comment about just worrying that there is a slightly sticky territory when we can't use the authorised rites of our tradition, because it's those of us who are marriage celebrants are only authorised because our church has nominated us to be authorised.
Yes.
Unlike a civil celebrant that's had a whole different screening. And it's the authorisation comes on the basis that we will use the rites of the tradition. Now, I'm not being a heavy on people who have to exercise the ordered liberty in the way it's intended to be exercised, but this is an area where there may well be some fine points, although I doubt that we're sufficiently, I don't know that it would be a high risk problem, no. But it's potentially there. I'm just wondering if you'd had any thoughts on that one. That was all.
Yeah, I agree. I think that it's a grey area, and it's probably an area we wouldn't want to get into terribly closely unless what was done was way out of. I think the wording of what was happened could well be under the general thing of a right of the uniting church, even though it's not the exact wording of the right. Yeah, the spirit was there rather than the legality.
That's actually what the Assembly itself said in 1997. The question was raised by some ministers or by a presbytery: do we have to follow the marriage rite word for word? And the answer that the Assembly gave was, no, not word for word, but you should use words that are of the same intent as what is in the rite.
Yeah, yeah. Kieran Colleen had her hand up again.
Yes, go ahead, Colleen. You will need to unmute.
Right.
There we are.
I don't know what, must be something to do with the recording. I love the irony, I love the irony that everyone who conducts marriages, whether they agree with them or not, must use the one form from the Attorney General's Department, which now refers to Party 1 and Party 2, no longer to bridegroom and bride. So every time I fill in one of those with people, I kind of have a little chuckle to myself that those who, even though I can't conduct same-gendered weddings, those who are quite, in some cases, vehemently opposed, have to use this same form.
Yes.
There's only one form of marriage in Australia.
Yep.
It's really what the form reinforces. And just as a little aside, because it's quite shocking, but Sydney has their own marriage service in which the woman promises submission to the husband, and in which there is a prayer for the woman to be given a submissive spirit.
Well, yeah.
They've authorised it only in their diocese, and I don't know to what extent it's used, but my view is it contravenes the law, because the law is equality.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's way beyond obey. It's beyond the concept of what was meant by obedience in the Book of Common Prayer.
Yeah, yeah. Now that's very sad. I'm sure that Sydney would like to authorise it for the whole of the church.
Well, they might, but do dream
won't.
at times, yes.
It's
Dreams our nightmare.
It's worthy of note that given the connection between baptism and marriage in Anglican sacramental understanding, that some clergy have taken to including a submission question in the baptism rite, which is an appropriation from rites in the Church of England that caused a bit of eyebrow raising a few years ago.
Oh, I haven't heard of that.
I can point you to the parish, Colleen.
Okay. Yes, do that. Send me a little email.
Yeah, and I think perhaps one of the thorny issues, certainly within sort of broader sacramental practice around baptism, is the need to balance ordered liberty, a la the Uniting Church, with some degree of adherence to agreed rites, which is probably the prime issue in current Anglican liturgical standoffs. I was noting recently that the only diocese in Australia that seems to have an active liturgical commission, of course, is the Diocese of Sydney.
Yes, I'm no longer part of the Melbourne one, and I've never heard of them in years.
Yeah. However, this is a meeting very focused on the Uniting Church, and it's been wonderful to have you, Peter, and thank you everybody who has contributed to the discussion. It's been very good to bring this discussion to the Academy, and in a sense, it's been a matter of the time being right. Before we finish up, I'd just like to draw your attention to a couple of things. Our next chapter meeting is on Wednesday, the 8th of September, 4:30 to 6:30 p.m, obviously Australian Eastern Standard Time. And we'll be joined by the Reverend Melanie Wally from the Diocese of Newcastle. Melanie is an Anglican priest, and she will be sharing with us her experience of generating pastoral ritual and liturgical marking for the experience of early pregnancy loss. This is an area where perhaps liturgical provision can sometimes be a little bit slim, especially given the often very complex grief that accompanies the loss of pregnancy early in gestation. Registration is open on Eventbrite right now, so do be sure to sign up to receive details about how to join the meeting. Also, I'm letting you know that early bird registration is open for the Academy of Liturgy National Conference 2021, postponed to 2022. You'll never get a better deal than now. And the registration page is linked on the Victoria Chapter Facebook page, and members, of course, receive the link regularly in email. And I think you can also access it off the Academy's website, which is Australian Academy of Liturgy.wordpress.com. The conference is called How Do We Sing the Lord's Song? Liturgy in Changing Times. When we started to thrash out this topic in 2019, we had no inkling that COVID-19 would come along and prompt a lot of liturgical questions. And so a footnote to the title might be, Where to Next with Liturgical Renewal Post-COVID? The conference will be running on open space technology, which means that it is open to all participants to bring their questions and passions and to seek dialogue partners for those issues that are keeping them awake at night when they come to think about how their communities worship, or at least that's how I imagine it to be, and it certainly is that way for me. I hope it is for you. So the open space process has been chosen to give you and all other conference participants the opportunity to open discussions about things that are genuinely and very really important in your community. As we go our ways, let us pray. May God bless us, keep away all evil, and lead us to eternal life. Amen.